There is a moment, and if you have lived through it, you know exactly what I am talking about, where everything goes quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, the kind that makes your skin crawl, the kind where you realize somewhere deep in your gut that the person sitting across from you has just shifted into something you have never seen before, something colder, something calculated, something that no longer pretends to love you. You made a decision. Maybe you said it out loud. Maybe you just felt it for the first time without flinching, that this is over, that you are done. And in that exact moment, the moment they sensed it, the game changed. Not slowed down, not softened, changed into something far more dangerous than anything they put you through before. Most people think the hardest part of leaving a narcissist is the leaving itself, the packing of bags, the difficult conversations, the grief of walking away from someone you once believed was your person. But that is not the hardest part. The hardest part is what happens the second they know you mean it, because that is when the mask does not just slip, it dissolves. And what is underneath has been waiting very patiently for this exact moment. This video is not about what narcissists do when they are comfortable. It is not about the love bombing, the silent treatment, or the gaslighting you have probably already heard about. This is about the final move, the one they save specifically for the moment you wake up, the dirtiest play in their entire psychological arsenal. And once you understand it, truly understand the mechanics of it, it loses all of its power over you completely, permanently. So stay with me, because what I am about to walk you through is going to explain things that have probably been living in your body as confusion, shame, and self-doubt for a very long time. To understand the final move, you first need to understand what a narcissist is actually running from. Beneath the confidence, beneath the control, beneath the charm and the rage and the manipulation, there is one thing driving every single behavior you have ever witnessed from them: terror. A specific, ancient, bone-deep terror of being nothing, of being empty, of being seen for what they truly are, a person who never developed a real self. Psychologists call this the false self. It is the constructed personality the narcissist built in childhood to survive a world that felt unsafe. Maybe they were raised by a parent who only gave them love when they performed. Maybe they were humiliated publicly and decided at 7 years old that they would never be vulnerable again. Whatever the origin, at some point they made it an unconscious trade. They buried their real self, fragile, uncertain, human, and replaced it with a version that could not be hurt. A version that needed to be admired, feared, or needed at all times, simply to feel real. Here is what that means for you. When you were in that relationship, you were not just a partner. You were a mirror. Every time you admired them, they felt real. Every time you feared them, they felt powerful. Every time you needed them, they felt significant. Your emotional reactions, your love, your anger, your tears, your laughter, were not just responses to them. They were the fuel that kept the entire false self running. You were the power source and you did not even know it. This is not a metaphor. This is literal psychology. The narcissist's nervous system learned to regulate itself through external validation rather than internal stability. They never developed the capacity to sit with themselves in silence and feel okay. So they built a system, a relationship, a dynamic, a set of behaviors designed to keep that validation flowing constantly. And at the center of that system was you. Now imagine what happens when the power source decides to switch off. Not a fight, not an argument they can win, not even a dramatic goodbye speech they can weaponize, just a quiet, certain internal withdrawal. The moment you stop needing their approval, the moment their criticism bounced off you instead of splitting you open, the moment you looked at them and felt nothing, not love, not hate, not fear, just clarity. That moment registers in their body like a 5-alarm fire. Everything they built their identity on, is suddenly threatened. The mirror they relied on to see themselves is being packed up and taken away. And the response to that level of existential threat is not sadness. It is not grief. It is something far more primitive. It is survival panic dressed up as control. You might have felt it before you could name it. The atmosphere in the room shifted. Conversations that used to feel manipulative started feeling predatory. Their eyes followed you differently, not with desire, but with calculation, as if they were assessing the fastest route to a target. Small violations of boundaries you had recently set. Subtle provocations designed not to hurt you, but to get a reaction from you. Any reaction, because your reaction is proof that they still exist in your world. This is the beginning of the final move. Not the move itself, but the setup, the reconnaissance. They are mapping your emotional terrain one last time, searching for the fastest way back inside. And what comes next, the actual weapon they deploy once they realize the quiet provocations are not working, is something so psychologically sophisticated, so perfectly designed to exploit the specific kind of person you are, that most people never see it coming, even after it has already worked on them. In the next part of this video, you are going to understand exactly what that weapon is, why it works on people like you specifically, and most importantly, why understanding it is the only protection you will ever need. Because here is the truth no one tells you. You do not need to become hard to survive this. You do not need to become cold or suspicious or emotionally shut down. You just need to understand what you are actually looking at. And once you do, you will never be the same person they thought they were dealing with. Let's talk about what happens in the hours, days, and sometimes weeks after they realize you are genuinely done. Because this phase has a very specific shape to it, and once you recognize the shape, you will stop being surprised by what they do next and start being prepared for it. The first thing that changes is the way they look at you, not dramatically, not in a way you could easily describe to a friend or a therapist. It is more like a quality of attention that shifts. Or before their gaze was possessive, the way someone looks at something they own, it becomes something harder to name. It becomes something harder to name. Appraising, tactical, as if they are no longer looking at you as a person, but as a problem they need to solve before it costs them something important. You might catch it over dinner, or in the car, or in that half second before they realize you are watching them watch you. And your gut registers it before your mind does. Something is wrong. Something is different. Something that was always hidden is now a little closer to the surface. What you are seeing is the collapse of the performance. For the entire relationship, maintaining the mask required effort. It required managing your perception of them, calibrating how much charm to deploy versus how much intimidation, knowing exactly when to apologize to keep you from leaving, and exactly when to punish you to keep you from leaving, feeling too secure. It was exhausting work, the constant management of a false image, but it was work they were willing to do as long as the supply was flowing, as long as you were still emotionally plugged into the dynamic. The moment you unplug, the motivation to maintain the performance disappears, not gradually, instantly. Because the performance was never for your benefit, it was for theirs. The charm, the occasional warmth, the moments that made you think this is the real them, none of that was an expression of who they are. It was a tool, a mechanism for securing your attachment. And tools get put down when they stop being useful. What you are left with, once the performance drops, is something that feels shockingly unfamiliar, even though you have been living beside it for months or years. A coldness that is not just emotional distance, a flatness behind the eyes that makes you feel like you are talking to someone who is calculating rather than feeling. Moments where their face does something, a flicker of contempt, a micro expression of satisfaction at your discomfort that passes so quickly you almost convince yourself you imagined it. You did not imagine it. What you are seeing is the part of them that was always there, running quietly behind the persona they showed you. The part that views other people not as human beings to connect with, but as resources to be managed. And now that the resource is withdrawing, the mask that covered that part is no longer being maintained. What you are seeing, possibly for the first time, is the thing underneath. This is what psychologists sometimes call the devaluation phase. But that clinical term does not fully capture how it actually feels. Because devaluation sounds like a gradual downgrade, a slow cooling of affection. What actually happens is more like a sudden rewrite. The entire narrative of your relationship starts getting edited in real time. Things they praised you for become things they mock. Your confidence, which they once said they loved, is suddenly arrogance. Your sensitivity, which they once said drew them to you, is suddenly weakness. Your independence, which they once said was attractive, is suddenly a character flaw that explains everything wrong between you. And here's the part that makes this so disorienting. They say these things with absolute conviction. There is no uncertainty in their voice, no sign that they remember the opposite being true 6 months ago. It is as if the earlier version of the story never existed, as if your entire history is being overwritten by a new version where you were always the problem, and they were always the one trying to hold things together despite you. This is not confusion on their part. It is not even conscious lying in the way most people think of lying. It is something more disturbing, a psychological defense mechanism called splitting, where the mind cannot hold two contradictory truths about the same person at the same time. You're either completely good or completely bad. There's no nuance, no middle ground, no complexity allowed. The moment you stop validating their false self, you get reassigned from the good category to the bad one. And every memory, every interaction, every piece of shared history gets retroactively reinterpreted through that new lens. This matters because of what it sets in motion next. Once you have been internally reclassified as the villain, the narcissist does something that looks on the surface like it is about you, but it is entirely about them. They begin to manage the narrative externally. They start talking, not to you, about you, to the people around you, the friends you share, the family members who know you both, the colleagues who see you both regularly, and they do it with a specific, very carefully constructed tone. Not rage, not accusations, concern. They approach these conversations with furrowed brows and lowered voices. They sigh heavily before they begin. They say things like, "I do not want to say anything negative, but I am genuinely worried." They frame themselves as reluctant witnesses to your unraveling, people who care about you deeply, but feel they have an obligation to share what they have been observing. They use words like erratic, unstable, concerning, not herself lately. They make people lean in, voices dropping to match theirs without ever having issued a single direct accusation. This is the smear campaign, and it is already in motion before you have even started telling your side of the story, before you have even realized there is a story to tell. The well has been poisoned. And now, when you reach out, when you try to process what you have been through, when you look for support in the people closest to you, you find something unexpected. A slight hesitation before they respond, a careful quality to the questions they ask, a sense that they are listening to you through a filter that was not there before. That filter has a name. And it was installed by the person you were trying to leave. You were prepared for the cold eyes. You were prepared for the rewritten history and the whisper campaign moving through your social circle like a slow poison. You had built something inside yourself. Not a wall exactly, but a kind of clarity. A quiet, firm knowing that what you were doing was right. That the distance you were creating was necessary. That the person you once loved was not who you thought they were. You held onto that knowing like a handrail in the dark, and then they cried. Not the performative frustration you had seen before, not the anger dressed up as hurt that they deployed when you set a boundary. This was diffus rent. This was the kind of crying that seems to come from somewhere so deep and so unguarded that your entire nervous system responds to it before your mind has a chance to intervene. Shoulders shaking, voice breaking, eyes that looked for the first time maybe ever, genuinely lost. And every carefully constructed wall you built began to tremble. This is the moment that has pulled more people back into cycles of abuse than any other. Not the love bombing at the beginning, not the intermittent reinforcement in the middle. This moment right here, the collapse, the breakdown, the sudden devastating vulnerability, is the most sophisticated and most dangerous weapon in the entire arsenal, because it does not work by overpowering you. It works by recruiting your own best qualities against you. Your empathy, your compassion, your deep, genuine belief that people can change. To understand why this works so completely, you need to understand something about the kind of person who ends up in these relationships in the first place. People who are targeted by narcissists are not weak. That is one of the most damaging myths about this experience, and it needs to be said clearly. The people who get drawn deepest into these dynamics are almost always people with an exceptional capacity for empathy, people who lead with generosity and assume the best about others, people who believe that love is something you work for and fight for and refuse to abandon when things get difficult. These are not flaws. In any other context, they are extraordinary qualities. But in this context, they are the exact vulnerabilities being targeted. The narcissist, whether consciously or through years of refined instinct, has spent the entire relationship mapping your emotional architecture. They know what makes you feel needed. They know what makes you feel guilty. They know the specific combination of words and behaviors that activates the part of you that believes broken people deserve to be stayed for. And when every other tactic has failed, when the cold eyes did not break you, when the rewritten history did not make you doubt yourself enough, when the smear campaign did not isolate you completely, they reach for this. The one thing they know you cannot easily walk away from, someone who appears to be suffering. It often begins with a message, or a phone call late at night, or them appearing somewhere you did not expect them, looking smaller than you have ever seen them look. The aggression is gone. The calculation is gone, or at least it appears to be. What is in front of you now seems like the raw, undefended version of a human being who has finally run out of armor. They might say they have not been sleeping, that they have not been eating, that everything feels pointless without you. They might, for the first time in the entire relationship, admit to things they spent years denying. I know I hurt you. I know I was not who you needed me to be. I have been looking at myself and I do not like what I see. And something in you responds to this so viscerally that it frightens you, because this is what you always wanted. Not the confession specifically, but what it represents, the possibility that they are capable of seeing themselves honestly, that the person you fell in love with was real and is still in there somewhere, buried under all the damage, finally trying to claw their way out. This is the version of them you have been grieving. This is the potential you have been holding on to through every terrible moment of the relationship. And here it is, standing in front of you, asking you not to give up. The pull is not weakness. The pull is human. It is the entirely natural response of a compassionate person being shown exactly what their compassion is most drawn to. You would have to be made of stone not to feel it. And they know that. They are counting on the fact that you are not made of stone. That is precisely why they are here. But here is what you need to hold on to in that moment. With both hands, like your psychological freedom depends on it, because it does. Genuine transformation does not arrive on cue. Real change, the kind that actually rewires the deep behavioral patterns we are talking about here, is slow, private, painful work that happens in therapy rooms and in solitary reckonings with oneself. It does not happen in the exact moment it becomes strategically necessary. It does not time itself to coincide with your departure. And it does not ask you to witness it, validate it, or stay for it. Real change does not need an audience. It does not come with a request attached. What they are showing you is not transformation. It is the performance of transformation, and it is targeted with surgical precision at the specific hope you have been carrying. The hope that this person, underneath everything, is capable of becoming who you always believed they could be. That hope is not foolish. It is one of the most human things about you. But in this moment, it is also a door they are asking you to open so they can walk back through it. And the moment you do, the moment you say, okay, let us try again, or even just, I forgive you, the tears dry with a speed that should terrify you. The vulnerability folds back up and is put away. The promises about therapy get vague and then forgotten. The behaviors that drove you to this point return, often within days, often worse than before, because now they know something new about you. They know exactly how far they have to push before you will leave. They know the precise threshold of your boundary. And they know that if they perform suffering convincingly enough, that boundary will move. You have not saved them. You have taught them how to keep you. There is a question that comes up in this moment that is worth sitting with honestly. When you imagine staying, when you picture yourself opening that door and letting them back in, who are you staying for? Are you staying for the person standing in front of you right now? Or are you staying for the person you imagined they were in the beginning? Because those are not the same person. The person in the beginning was a reflection of your own hopes and values mirrored back to you through the early performance of the relationship. The person in front of you now is the same person who rewrote your history, who whispered about you to your friends, who looked at you with those calculating eyes when they thought you were not watching. The tears are real in the sense that the desperation behind them is real. The fear of losing their primary source of stability is genuine. But desperation is not the same thing as change. Fear of consequences is not the same thing as remorse. And suffering is not the same thing as growth. Walking away from someone who is crying is one of the hardest things a compassionate person will ever do. It goes against something so deeply wired in you that it can feel like a moral failure, like you are abandoning someone in their darkest moment. But compassion without discernment is not a virtue. It is a vulnerability. And the most important thing you can understand right now is this: you are not responsible for the emotional state of someone who manufactured that emotional state specifically to prevent you from protecting yourself. You are allowed to witness their pain without absorbing it. You are allowed to wish them healing from a distance that keeps you safe. You are allowed to close the door gently but completely without owing anyone an explanation for why you did know. They stay to burn, because what comes next, the moment they realize the tears did not work, is the part that will require every ounce of understanding you have built so far. You held the line. You did not open the door. You stood in the fire of their manufactured vulnerability, and you did not reach out to extinguish it with your own peace. And for a moment, there was silence, the kind that feels like the pause between lightning and thunder, where you know something is coming, you just do not know yet how loud it will be. Then it arrived. Not sadness, not acceptance, not the quiet retreat of someone who finally understands that it is over. What arrived was something else entirely, a calculated, precise, and devastatingly targeted campaign designed to do one specific thing: not to win you back. That goal has been abandoned. The new goal is simpler and far more sinister. If they cannot have you, they will make sure that the version of you that walks away from this relationship is so damaged, so confused, so hollowed out by self-doubt that you cannot trust your own mind for years. This is the dirtiest final move, and it has a name. It is called projective identification. And unlike the manipulation tactics that came before it, the gaslighting, the smear campaign, the false surrender, this one does not just target your emotions. It targets your identity. It attempts through a series of precise psychological maneuvers to make you become the thing they are accusing you of being. Not just believe it, become it. Here is how it works in practice. They begin a provocation campaign that is almost impossible to describe to someone who has not experienced it, because from the outside it looks like nothing. It looks like ordinary conflict, but from the inside it feels like being slowly lowered into water that is just slightly too hot. Hot enough to be unbearable, not hot enough to make the danger immediately obvious. A comment delivered with a smile that targets the specific insecurity they know lives deepest in you. A denial of something you both witnessed together 5 minutes ago, delivered with such calm certainty that you start to wonder if your memory is functioning correctly. A boundary you set, violated not with aggression, but with a smirk. Just enough to register, not enough to be called out without you looking oversensitive. Drop by drop, day by day, constructed with the patience of someone who has been studying your nervous system for years. And here is what happens inside your body during this phase, because this is the part that most people never talk about. Before you react outwardly, you start to feel something that does not belong to you. A rage that seems disproportionate to what is visibly happening, a trembling in your hands during a conversation that should be mundane, a tightness in your chest that appears before they have even said anything particularly terrible. Your body is registering something your conscious mind is still trying to rationalize. What you are feeling is their emotion, transferred. This is not mystical. This is documented psychology. Emotional contagion is a real and measurable phenomenon. The unconscious transmission of feeling states between people in close proximity. And the narcissist, whether they understand it intellectually or simply operated by instinct, has learned to use this process as a weapon. They suppress their own rage with a terrifying preternatural calm. They hold it below the surface while systematically dismantling your capacity for emotional regulation through low-level, relentless provocation. They become the eye of the hurricane, still, composed, apparently reasonable, while engineering the storm around them. And eventually, because you are human, because your nervous system, has limits, because no amount of awareness can indefinitely protect a body from sustained psychological assault. You break, you raise your voice, you say something cutting, you throw something, or cry in a way that looks uncontrolled, or finally say the thing you have been holding back for months in a tone that sounds to anyone watching like instability. In that exact millisecond, they transform. The calm they have been performing becomes genuine, or rather it becomes weaponized calm, the composed, concerned expression of someone who has been enduring irrational behavior and is saddened but unsurprised by this latest outburst. If there are people nearby, they turn to them. If there is no one nearby, they document it, a phone raised with quiet deliberateness, a screenshot taken, a mental note filed for future use. And the story they have been building about you, the erratic one, the unstable one, the difficult one, receives its evidence. They have transferred their shadow into you. And for a moment, looking at yourself through their eyes and through the eyes of whoever witnessed that scene, you see it too. You feel the shame of it in your body before you have even fully processed what just happened. And the thought arrives, quiet and devastating, maybe I am the problem. Maybe I have been the problem all along. Look at me, look at what I just did. This is the move. This is what all of it was building toward. Not to make you stay, not even to make you suffer, though suffering is a side effect they find satisfying. The real goal is this moment right here, where your own reaction becomes the evidence that imprisons you, where your completely understandable, physiologically inevitable response to sustained psychological torture gets reframed as your character, where the person who engineered your breakdown gets to walk away looking like the only adult in the row. Oh, and here is the most important thing I will say in this entire video. The thing I need you to hold on to. Your reaction was not your character. It was your biology. When the human nervous system is subjected to sustained, inescapable stress. When the threat response is activated repeatedly with no resolution. When the emotional regulation system is deliberately overwhelmed by a calculated external force. It responds the way any system responds to overload. It breaks the circuit. The prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for measured, rational response, goes offline. The amygdala, the ancient threat detection center, takes over, and what comes out in that moment is not who you are. It is what was done to you. A doctor tapping your knee produces a kick. That kick is not your choice. It is a reflex. What they engineered in you was a reflex, a predictable physiological response to a precise and deliberate stimulus, and then they filmed the kick and called it evidence of your violence. Understanding this does not just explain what happened, it dissolves the shame of it. And dissolving the shame is everything, because the shame is the chain. As long as you are focused on your own reaction, replaying it, analyzing it, mortifying yourself over it, you are not looking at what produced it. You are doing their work for them. You are the prisoner guarding your own cell. The moment you understand that your reaction was a manufactured outcome, not a character revelation, the spell breaks. You stop being the person they need you to be. The guilty one, the unstable one, the one who has to make amends for an outburst that they engineered from start to finish. You become something they have no script for. Someone who understands the mechanism. Someone who can watch them run the play and name every move in real time without being consumed by it. This is what P, ecological immunity, actually looks like. Not coldness, not indifference performed as a strategy, not the gray rock technique deployed through gritted teeth while you fall apart privately. Real immunity, the kind that comes from understanding so deep it changes the way you see them at a fundamental level. You stop seeing a person who chose to hurt you. You start seeing a system running a program designed in childhood, reinforced over decades, executed automatically in the presence of any threat to the false self. There is no malice in a program. There is no cruelty in a reflex. There is just mechanism, and you cannot be destroyed by a mechanism you can see clearly. When you reach this place, and you will reach this place, something remarkable happens. The things they do stop landing. The provocations bounce. The tears do not move you the way they used to. Not because you have become hard, but because you can see the architecture of them. You know what is underneath. You know what need is being served. And you can hold that knowledge with something that is not quite pity and not quite indifference, but somewhere in between. A kind of clear-eyed compassion that has nothing to do with staying and everything to do with understanding. You will see their name on a screen someday and feel quiet. Not the hammering heart of old fear, not the ache of old love, not even the hot flash of anger, just quiet. The way you feel when you look at an old photograph of a version of yourself you no longer are. Recognition without ownership. History without grip. That is the destination. That is what this entire painful, disorienting, identity-shaking experience has been moving you toward, not despite the difficulty of it, but through it. The person you are becoming on the other side of this is not the person you were before it started. You are sharper now, more boundaried, more honest about what you will and will not accept, more capable of recognizing within the first few conversations the patterns that used to take you years to name. You did not just survive something, you were educated by something, and that education belongs to you permanently, in a way that nothing they do from this point forward can touch. The dirtiest final move failed. Not because you became someone harder, but because you became someone who could finally see it clearly. And that changes everything. There is a particular kind of person who moves through the world almost invisibly, not because they lack depth, not because they have nothing to say, but because somewhere along the way, they learned that their silence was more powerful than their noise. You've probably met someone like this. Maybe you've never quite been able to put your finger on what made them different. They don't dominate conversations. They don't announce themselves. And yet when they leave the room, something leaves with them, a steadiness, a warmth, a presence that was so quiet you almost didn't notice it until it was gone. Or maybe, and this is the more important possibility, that person is you. If you've ever been told you're too sensitive, if you've ever stayed quiet in a room full of people, not because you had nothing to say, but because you could feel everything being said beneath the surface. If you've ever absorbed someone else's pain before they even put it into words, then what you're about to hear is not just interesting information. It is the explanation you have been waiting for your whole life. Because the quiet empath is one of the most misunderstood types of people on earth. In a world that rewards volume, performance, and constant self-expression, the person who chooses silence is often read as passive, withdrawn, lacking confidence, even cold. But that reading is not just wrong. It is the precise opposite of the truth. The quiet empath isn't silent because they have less going on. They are silent because they have more. So much more, in fact, that they have learned, often through hard experience, that most environments are simply not equipped to hold what they carry. This video is about what they carry, what you carry, and why the specific qualities that make you stay quiet are not weaknesses to overcome. They are rare gifts that most people will spend their entire lives never developing. Let's start at the beginning, not with a list, not with a definition, but with something more important, a feeling you will recognize. You are in a room. A conversation is happening. On the surface, everything seems fine. People are laughing, talking, exchanging the normal currency of social interaction. But underneath it all, you are picking up something else entirely. A tension between two people that no one has acknowledged. A sadness behind someone's smile that is so carefully hidden they probably don't even know it's visible. A shift in the energy of the room that happens so subtly, no one else seems to have registered it. And you are sitting with all of this, not because you chose to, not because you went looking for it, but because this is simply how you receive the world. Through feeling first and thinking second. This is not imagination. This is not overthinking. This is a form of perception that neuroscience has begun to study seriously, linked to a trait called high sensory processing sensitivity. People with this trait, and research suggests it appears in roughly 15 to 20% of the population, have nervous systems that process environmental and emotional information more deeply than average, more completely, with more layers. They notice subtleties that others filter out. They feel the emotional undercurrents of situations with a clarity that can be, at times, overwhelming. And here's what no one tells you about this trait when you're growing up with it. It does not come with instructions. It does not come with a name. It just comes as a feeling of being too much and too little at the same time. Too sensitive for the world as it is, and not enough of the things the world seems to reward: loudness, certainty, the effortless performance of confidence. So you went quiet. Not because silence was your natural state, but because silence became your protection, your way of managing the volume of everything you were already receiving, your way of moving through the world without adding more noise to a signal that was already overwhelming. And in that quiet, something extraordinary happened. Without realizing it, you began to develop a set of qualities that are almost impossible to cultivate intentionally. Qualities that therapy cannot teach, that success cannot buy, that no amount of self-improvement content can manufacture. They grew in you precisely because of the silence, precisely because of the sensitivity, precisely because you were forced to navigate a world that was often too loud, too shallow, and too fast for the way you were wired to experience it. These are the qualities we are going to explore today, not as a flattering list designed to make you feel good for 5 minutes, but as a serious, honest examination of what it actually means to be a quiet empathy, the costs, the gifts, and the profound responsibility that comes with both. Because here's what I need you to understand before we go any further. The qualities you have developed are not just personally meaningful. They are socially essential. In a world increasingly defined by reaction, performance, and noise, the people who can sit in silence and actually feel what is true are not just rare. They are necessary. The quiet empath is not someone who opted out of the world. They are someone who chose to experience it at a depth that most people never reach. You stayed quiet, and in that quiet, you became something that the loudest rooms in the world cannot produce. The question is, do you know what you became? Do you recognize the specific, rare qualities that your silence has been quietly building year after year in ways you have probably never had the language to describe? By the end of this, you will. And nothing will look quite the same after that. The first quality that sets the quiet empath apart is something that sounds simple until you realize how vanishingly rare it actually is. It is the ability to be fully present with another person's pain without needing to fix it, reframe it, or make it stop. Think about what most people do when someone they care about is suffering. They offer solutions. They offer perspective. They say things like, at least, and look on the bright side, and everything happens for a reason. And they do this not because they are cold or uncaring. They do it because sitting with someone else's pain without trying to resolve it is, for most people, genuinely unbearable. The discomfort of witnessing suffering without being able to stop it triggers something deep in the nervous system, a need to act, to solve, to restore equilibrium as quickly as possible. The impulse to fix is, at its root, an impulse to escape the discomfort of feeling helpless. But the quiet empath does not do this, not because they feel less, because they feel more. They have spent so long navigating their own deep emotional landscape that they have developed something most people never build, a tolerance for sitting inside difficult feelings without needing an exit. They can be with you in your pain, fully, without looking for the door. This quality has a name in psychology. It is called the capacity for non-anxious presence. And it is one of the most healing things one human being can offer another. Not advice, not solutions, not the relentless optimism that is really just discomfort in disguise. Simply the willingness to sit beside someone in the dark and not flinch, to let them feel what they feel without rushing them toward the light. You may not have known that what you were doing had a name. You may have simply experienced it as staying when others left, as being the person people called at 2 a.m, not because you had the right words, but because somehow, without either of you being able to explain it, your presence made the unbearable slightly more bearable. That is not a small thing. That is one of the rarest and most profound gifts in the entire vocabulary of human connection. And it came from your quiet. It came from all those years of learning to sit with your own intensity without running from it. Every time you felt something deeply and chose to stay with it rather than distract yourself from it, you were building a muscle that most people never train, a muscle of presence, of stillness inside the storm, of being able to hold space for another person's suffering because you have already learned to hold your own. The second quality is one that will surprise you because it is usually framed as a problem. Quiet empaths feel things before they can name them. They walk into a room and know something is wrong. Before anyone has said a word, they sense the shift in a relationship weeks before the conversation that confirms it. They feel a decision is right or wrong in their body before their mind has processed the logic. In the world we currently live in, a world that trusts data, credentials, and articulable reasoning above almost everything else, this quality is regularly dismissed as irrational, emotional, unreliable. It is none of those things. What quiet empaths or accessing when they feel before they think is a form of intelligence that researchers now call somatic or embodied cognition. The body, it turns out, is not separate from the mind. It is an extension of it, a processing system that operates in parallel with conscious thought, drawing on thousands of microsignals. A barely perceptible change in someone's tone, a fraction of a second of tens, ion around someone's eyes, a shift in the rhythm of a conversation so subtle it exists below the threshold of conscious awareness, and synthesizing them into a feeling that arrives before language can catch up. What looks like intuition is actually perception. Extraordinarily refined, extraordinarily accurate perception that has been sharpened by a lifetime of paying attention to everything that most people have learned to ignore. The cost of this quality is real. When you feel things before you can name them, the world around you rarely validates what you are sensing. You say something feels off and you are told you are imagining it. You feel a person's hidden sadness and you are told they seem fine. You sense a danger in a situation and you are told you are overreacting. Over time, this can produce a deep fracture between what you know and what you are permitted to say you know. A split between your inner signal and your outer voice. And that fracture, that long habit of doubting what you feel because the world keeps telling you to, is one of the primary reasons you went quiet in the first place. But here is the truth that your silence was always protecting. Your signal is not broken. It was never broken. The world was simply not paying close enough attention to see what you were seeing. There's a third quality that grows directly from the first two. Quiet empaths have an extraordinary capacity for loyalty, not the performative loyalty of grand gestures and public declarations, the real kind, the kind that shows up without announcement, the kind that remembers what you said 3 months ago about the thing you were afraid of and asks about it quietly without making a production of having remembered, the kind that stays present through the parts of a person that are not easy to be present for, the slow parts, the repetitive parts, the parts where there is no grow, with no resolution, no visible progress, just someone struggling and needing to know they are not alone in it. This loyalty is not naivety. The quiet empath sees people clearly, perhaps more clearly than anyone. They are not loyal because they are blind to flaws. They are loyal because they have the emotional capacity to hold a person's flaws and their worth simultaneously without needing one to cancel out the other. They understand at a level that goes beyond words that people are not their worst moments. That struggle is not the same as failure. That the person in front of them is more than the version of themselves they are currently able to show. That understanding, that profound, patient, unsentimental understanding, is not something the world produces easily. It is something the quiet empath has earned. Through silence, through feeling, through all those years of learning to hold complexity without collapsing it into something simpler and easier to bear. You stayed quiet. And in that quiet, you learned to see people whole. There is a fourth quality that almost never gets spoken about because it lives in a part of the quiet empath's experience that is deeply uncomfortable to examine. It is this: quiet empaths have an unusually high tolerance for carrying things alone. Not because they do not need support, not because they are self-sufficient in the way that word is usually meant, as a compliment, as a sign of strength, as evidence that someone has it together, but because somewhere in their history, they learned that bringing their full interior experience to other people created more complexity than it resolved. They learned that their depth was sometimes too much, that their feelings arrived at a size and an intensity that made other people uncomfortable. That asking for what they actually needed often resulted not being held, but in being managed, redirected, gently, sometimes not so gently, told to feel something smaller. So they adapted. They became the person who holds space for everyone else while quietly, invisibly, holding their own weight at the same time. They became fluent in the language of other people's needs, while developing an almost unconscious habit of translating their own needs into something smaller, something less demanding, something the room could accommodate. They became, without ever deciding to, the person everyone leans on, and the person no one thinks to ask about because they always seem fine. Because they have become so skilled at carrying things quietly that the carrying itself has become invisible. This is both a gift and a wound. And it is important to name both honestly, because the quiet empath does not need another voice telling them only the flattering half of their story. They need the whole truth. And the whole truth is this: the capacity to carry things alone is evidence of extraordinary inner strength. It is also evidence of an old and unhealed belief that your full weight is too much for anyone else to bear. Both things are true simultaneously. The strength is real. The wound underneath it is also real. And the quality of understanding that this video is trying to offer you is not the kind that skips past the wound to get to the more comfortable part. It is the kind that sits with both. The way you have always sat with both in other people, in rooms where no one else was willing to stay. The fifth quality is perhaps the most quietly radical of all. Quiet paths are natural truth tellers, not in the blunt, confrontational sense, but in a far more subtle and ultimately more powerful way. They tell the truth through their presence, through their questions, through the particular quality of their attention, which has a way of making people feel seen so completely that peak performance they have been maintaining becomes too exhausting to continue. People become honest around quiet empaths, not because they were pushed or challenged, but because something in the empath's quality of presence makes pretending feel unnecessary, almost impossible. This is not a technique. It is not something the quiet empath is consciously doing. It is the natural consequence of how they listen. Most people listen with the intention of responding. They are already composing their reply while the other person is still speaking. They are half present, half elsewhere, managing the conversation as much as receiving it. But the quiet empath listens to understand completely, with their whole attention directed outward rather than inward. And the person being listened to can feel the difference, often without being able to name it. In the same way, you can feel the difference between a room with natural light and a room with artificial light, even if you cannot immediately identify which is which. When someone feels truly listened to, something in them relaxes. The defended parts soften. The rehearsed answers give way to the real ones. And suddenly, in what was meant to be a casual conversation, someone is saying the truest thing they have said in months, not because they plan to, but because the quality of the quiet empath's attention made the truth feel safe. Think about the people in your life who have done this for you. The ones who asked the question no one else thought to ask. The ones who heard what you meant underneath what you said. The ones who created, without fanfare or effort, the precise conditions in which you could finally be honest about something you had been quietly carrying. Now ask yourself, were those people the loudest in the room? Were they the most dominant, the most assertive, the quickest with advice or analysis? Almost certainly not. They were the still ones, the quiet ones, the ones who brought a kind of spaciousness to the conversation that made room for the truth to emerge. That is you, that quality which others have experienced as a gift in your presence, belongs to you. It is not an accident of personality. It is the direct result of all those years of choosing depth over noise, of learning to attend to the world beneath the world. The sixth quality is one that takes the longest to develop, and consequently one that tends to become more pronounced in quiet empaths as they move through life rather than less. It is the quality of discernment, not the snap judgment that masquerades as intuition, not the cynicism that masquerades as wisdom. True discernment, the slow, patient, non-reactive ability to observe a person or a situation across time and draw conclusions that are grounded in reality rather than hope or fear. Quiet empaths are watchers. They always have been. In rooms where others were performing, they were observing. In conversations where others were talking, they were listening to what was not being said. In relationships where others were moving fast, they were noticing the patterns, the inconsistencies, the small moments of revelation that only become visible when you are paying the kind of attention that most people are too distracted or too impatient to sustain. And over time, all of that watching, all of that patient observation builds something invaluable, an internal library of human behavior, a deep, nuanced understanding of how people work, not in the abstract, but in the specific, how this person behaves under pressure. What this relationship looks like when the initial warmth has faded, what this situation will become if these patterns continue. Quiet empaths often know things about people and situations long before those things become obvious. Not because they are because they have been paying attention the entire time. This discernment, however, does not make them cold. It does not make them calculating or suspicious or closed, because the quiet empath pairs their clear seeing with something that prevents it from curdling into cynicism, a fundamental, almost stubborn belief in the capacity of people to be more than their worst patterns. They see clearly and they choose compassion anyway. They know the flaws and they stay present anyway, not out of naivety, but out of a deep, informed, clear-eyed faith in human complexity. That combination, seeing clearly and caring anyway, is the rarest thing in the world. You have been building it your entire life, in the quiet, in the patience, in the watching, in all those years of feeling everything and saying so little and staying anyway. You were not falling behind. You were becoming something. There is something that happens to quiet empaths at a certain point in their lives. It does not arrive on a schedule. It does not announce itself. But it comes usually after a period of particular difficulty, after a relationship that cost them more than it should have, after a season of giving so completely that they lost the thread of themselves, after one too many rooms where they made themselves smaller to make others more comfortable. It comes quietly, the way most important things come to quiet people, and what it brings is a question, not an angry question, not a bitter one. A genuine, searching, deeply personal question that changes everything once it is honestly asked. The question is this: what would it look like to finally stop abandoning myself? This is the threshold moment in the quiet empathist's journey, and it is the quality we have been building toward this entire time, because it is not really a separate quality at all. It is what all the other qualities have been quietly preparing them for: the non-anxious presence, the embodied intuition, the loyalty, the capacity to carry things along, the truth-telling through attention, the discernment paired with compassion. None of these gifts were ever meant to be directed exclusively outward. They were never meant to be a permanent donation to everyone else's well-being while the empath's own interior life went unattended. They were always meant to eventually turn inward, to be brought home. The quiet empath who has reached this threshold does not become a different person. They do not suddenly become loud or hard or closed. They do not trade their sensitivity for armor. What they do is something far more difficult and far more powerful. They begin to apply to themselves the same quality of attention they have always given to everyone else. They begin to listen to their own signal with the same patience and respect they have always offered to other people's pain. They begin to take their own interior experience as seriously as they have always taken everyone else's. And this is where something remarkable happens. Because when the quiet empathi finally turns all of that extraordinary perceptual capacity inward, when they bring that same depth of presence to their own life, their own needs, their own truth, they do not become self-absorbed. They become whole. They do not shrink their care for others. They expand their care to finally include themselves. And in doing so, they become not less of what they have always been, but more grounded, more discerning about where their energy goes, more genuinely present with others because they are no longer running on empty, pouring from a vessel they have never taken the time to refill. This is the seventh quality, and in many ways it is the most important one on this entire list. It is the capacity for self-return, the ability, hard won and oh, that and long delayed, to come back to yourself. To recognize when you have drifted so far into other people's worlds that you have lost contact with your own, and to make the quiet, undramatic, profoundly courageous choice to return. Most people will never develop this quality because most people are never asked to sacrifice themselves the way the quiet empath has been. The depth of the return is proportional to the depth of the departure. And the quiet empath, who has spent years, sometimes decades, navigating the world primarily through the lens of other people's experience, has a homecoming available to them that is unlike anything available to someone who never ventured that far out. When they come home to themselves, they bring everything they learned on the journey, every insight gathered from 1,000 careful observations, every truth felt in the body before the mind could name it, every moment of holding space for someone else's darkness that quietly, invisibly expanded their own capacity to hold space for their own. They return not as who they were before the sensitivity, before the silence, before all of it. They return as someone who has been shaped by all of it into something rare and complete and deeply, unmistakably themselves. Now here's what I want you to sit with, because this is the part that matters most. Everything described in this video, the presence, the intuition, the loyalty, the discernment, the truth-telling, the capacity for self-return, none of it required you to be loud. None of it required you to perform. None of it required you to be the most visible person in the room, the quickest to speak, the most assertive in claiming space. All of it grew in the quiet. All of it was cultivated in the very conditions that the world told you were your limitations. Your silence was never a deficit. It was the soil. And what grew in it, what has been growing in it your entire life, whether you had the language to recognize it or not, is a form of depth that cannot be manufactured, cannot be shortcut, and cannot be taken from you. There are people in your life who have felt this, who have sat with you and felt, without being able to explain it, that they were in the presence of someone genuinely different, not louder, not more impressive in the conventional sense, but realer, somehow, more present, more honest, more capable of seeing them as they actually are, rather than as they were performing to be. Those people were not wrong about you. They were simply responding to something true. The world will keep rewarding noise. It will keep elevating the most visible, the most vocal, the most aggressively self-promotional. And the quiet empath will keep sitting slightly apart from all of that, feeling everything, saying less than they know, offering more than most people will ever recognize. This is not a tragedy. It is not a disadvantage dressed up in spiritual language to make it more palatable. It is the simple, clear reality of what it means to be wired the way you are. You feel more, you see more, you carry more, and you offer more, not because you have to, not because you were conditioned to, but because somewhere beneath all the old wounds and all the learned smallness, all the years of making yourself easier for the world to accommodate, there's a person who genuinely, fundamentally, from the inside out, cares about people, about truth, about the invisible things that hold the world together beneath the surface of everything loud and visible and easily measured. That person, the one who stayed quiet while understanding everything, was never the problem. They were always the answer. You just needed someone to finally say it clearly enough for you to believe it. Now you have heard it. What you do with that is yours.